Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hello.
Hi, Perry.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Well, here I am.
I renamed you as me. Sorry, one second.
Yeah, stop that.
Hello.
I'm Nanette Shore, and I work in the Bronx for legal services, and I am the mother of Pie Slap.
Hello, Una. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
I was trying to donate on your website, but I couldn't do it.
You what? You tried to what?
Donate on the website, but I was having problems with that.
You were trying to join to join.
Donate.
Yes. Well, why don't I drop you a line by email and we'll see if we can resolve it for you.
Okay. And then
Here's an alternative. You just take your money and put it through the screen.
Yeah, that's something, looks like something I would do.
It's never worked for me, but you can try it.
Una, what is your email address? Let me jot it down before others.
utapper@optonline.net. Tapper, T-A-P-P-E-R.
Oh, you know, I just realized there must be people waiting to be admitted, but I don't see the, oh my goodness.
Okay, we can work on that later.
Okay, sorry, it's my fault. Thank you, Una. Welcome, everyone. Welcome all.
Hold on, please. Hi, Nanette. Hi, Perry. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Peter.
Can't seem to get enough sound here. Just a sec.
We do hear you.
I'll fix it.
Oh, let me just pause the recording.
25 years and counting. And I'm in the private practice of law currently in Miami Beach, looking out over palm trees. Well, if I go outside, I'll be. So I'd like everyone to say their name, where they are, what's going on, and what they are currently looking at, their surroundings. So I'm just going to call people's names out as I see them on the screen.
But this should be fairly brief, right, Perry?
Yeah, fairly brief, please. We don't need your life story, but if you want to publish an article, get back to us. Nanette, you're next in a row, so why don't we just go across?
Okay, thanks, Perry. Greetings all. I'm Nanette Shore. I'm sitting at my kitchen table in Long Island City, New York, which is in Queens in New York City. And I'm also a longtime member of Pie Slap and work in the world of social justice, legal services work. So great to be here.
Thank you. Bruce Peterson, you're muted.
I'm Bruce Peterson. I'm a retired judge in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm in my home office, and I've been a member of a Pie Slap for about 10 years or so, and was a member of the executive committee for much of that time. And I've read some of Peter's work on this and looking forward to hearing from him.
Great. Una Tapper.
I am Una Tapper. I'm a retired administrative law judge in the Division of Parole in New York, retired in Central Islip, and looking at several inches of snow, very pleased that my 5-year-old neighbor came by and helped me to dig my car out.
Thank you. Blanca Leon.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name's Blanca. I'm based in the UK, outside of London. I'm a commercial lawyer. I've just in the last week left the corporate world, so I'm exploring what's next. And it's really nice to be here with you all.
Welcome, Blanca.
Welcome, yes. Kim Vanderheide,
Hayden.
sorry.
That's okay. I am, Kim Vanderheiden. I'm in Oakland, California in my art studio. And I do artwork relating to justice. And I've been following Peter's work for about 5 or 6 years. Was just finally able to participate in the calls in the last year when the time moved. So I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. Nice to have you. Yudong Zhu.
Everyone, I'm Yudong Zhu. This, I believe, is my 4th or 5th meeting I attended at PySlap. I couldn't count, but I'm a public policy student at University of Maryland. I'm currently sitting in one of the study lounges at my school, and I'm looking at the screen and looking at each one of you.
Welcome. Stuart Webb, Stu.
Yeah, Stu Webb from Minnesota. It's about 99 below here, and been a member for some time now, and a retired collaborative lawyer. Thank you.
Okay, welcome, Stu. Libby Camo.
Hi, I'm in Denver. I'm halfway underground in the garden level looking up at my neighbor's house. And to my right is my front yard where I'm hoping to experiment with regenerative agriculture and sharing produce with the neighbors. I am a retired administrative law judge, had started a mediation program, ran across Kim Wright. I've been on your email list ever since, but this is one of my first actual programs. I've been very consumed by worry about the fault line in our current Constitution around the doctrine of discovery and the role of nature as only property.
Oh, well, welcome to our monthly call. Ian Tom.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ian Tom. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area right now. I'm a software engineer, and I was introduced to PySlap through Peter a few months ago.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Next up is Bradley Roth.
Hello, my name is Bradley Roth. I'm in New York City where we have snow. I've been attending PySlap events and programs for the last couple of years. And I'm an attorney and mediator, co-founded and chair of Mediators Beyond Borders New York, and teach a course in mediation and meditation at John Jay College of Criminal Justice.
Terrific, nice to have you. Sylvia Clute.
Yes, okay. I'm Sylvia Clute. I'm in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm only going to be able to be with you today for the first half hour. But I'm a former trial attorney, civil trial attorney, and now I devote all of my time to a theory of justice that I call unitive justice that has no hierarchical, judgmental, or punitive elements in it. And right now we're working on a prison training program that's based on unitive justice principles. That's very exciting, among a number of other things that we're doing. So I'm delighted to be here, and I've been looking forward to this, Peter.
Great, nice to have you. Bonnie Silvestri is next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bonnie. As Perry said, I've met several of you when I used to live in Manhattan and then moved to Florida. So I met Perry in Florida. And I'm in my backyard and looking at my house that was newly painted. And I'm very inspired by this topic. And I'm currently teaching women in the law. And I believe you're going to get into Amy Coney Barrett's appointment. So I want to hear more about that. Inspired by the concept of gender equity, and I work for government. Thank you.
Great, welcome. Robin Morris, you're next up.
Hi, I'm Robin. I'm currently in Oakland. I'm working on my desk, which is in my closet. So I'm looking at my clothes right now. And I work in e-discovery.
Robin is our latest new member. Welcome to the fold. I think next is Kara McCarthy, is it?
Hi, yeah, Kara Perry McCarthy's my middle name, but it's all good.
Oh, well, your whole name doesn't appear on the screen.
Just change that, but that's fine. I like McCarthy. I like my maiden name.
I like Perry.
Right, you might be partial to that. I was gonna do Mick Perry. I thought that would be good.
Yeah.
I am driving, so I am carefully watching the road, and I will not put my video on. But I am in New Jersey, and I recently, in September, left the corporate world. I was in Big Pharma, assistant general counsel. I'm now a certified yoga and meditation teacher, and currently taking Kim Wright's Conscious Contract course. So I'm really excited to be part of these conversations and see what the next chapter is. Thank you.
Welcome, and be careful.
Yes, I will. Thank you so much.
Matthew Rodman.
Hi, I'm calling from England in Totnes. Elaine sort of introduced me to PySlap through the Conscious Lawyer, and I'm got a practice called New Economy Law, and also teaching constitutional and public law part-time freelancing at one of the universities. Just started doing that, so I'm quite interested in seeing how the development in the US is what Peter's talking about.
Great,
thank you.
Great. Peter, I don't know, do you want to introduce yourself briefly before we turn the program over to you?
Sure, I'm Peter Gable. I'm in San Francisco. I'm a longtime law professor, was one of the founders of PySlap, and I'm sitting in my living room, and I don't know if you can see it. You can't see through the window. There's a spectacular blossoming yellow blossom tree right outside my window, which blossoms periodically. I can't figure out why, and when it does, it goes from being an austere branch tree to a fully blossomed yellow tree. It's amazing. And it's amazing to me that all the branches blossom at once. How does that happen? What do they know about each other? There's one, apparently there was an article this week that said trees have heartbeats. So we have a lot to learn. We have a lot to learn about trees and beings, living beings. Okay, that's it.
Indeed, thank you. So I think everybody's had a little piece. Is that right? Anybody has not introduced themselves? Okay.
Hi, my name is Kim, and I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area.
Oh.
And I am in my living room, and I am on the board of the Journal for Law and the Political Economy. It's a new peer-reviewed journal that is online, and I just want to put that out there for folks to check us out. Thank you, Perry.
Okay, sounds a lot like Kim Clark.
Oh, sorry, just Kim, if you want to put the link, if you could put that info in the chat about the journal, we can all take a look.
Well, before I turn it over to Nanette, as the membership director of PySlap, I want to encourage each of you who have not already done so to officially join our organization. The dues are minimal, but they help support our good works. I'm going to direct you to spiritlawpolitics.org, which has a handy dandy menu for joining. Now, Nanette Shore or Peter Gable, whichever you prefer. Peter, you want to take it away?
Do you want to say anything, or shall I just start? Go ahead.
I'm just delighted that Peter is going to be talking about this really important subject, that he brings his, the special lens that he brings to the spiritual and political and legal world. So I don't have a long intro, but I'm just very much looking forward to this talk, and welcome, Peter. Take it away.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And I think Ian is going to be posting various things on the chat line to articles I've written on this subject. Okay, well, so in the United States now, we have 6 Supreme Court justices who purport to believe in originalism in some form, some of them in orthodox form. Originalism here meaning that the Constitution, in reviewing legislation, the constitutionality of legislation, and in the scope of constitutional rights, that the Constitution must be interpreted according to the original meaning that it had in 1789. And I thought I would quickly just go over this little bit of history with you and then talk about the contradiction between this originalist worldview and the worldview that we aspire to. So when I went to law school in 1969 to 1972, there was no such thing as originalism. You know, the ism part makes it seem like a sort of well-hewn philosophy of some kind. There was no such term that I knew of. And in fact, there was virtually no attention paid to what people thought in 1789. You know, a nod was always made to the intent of the framers in interpreting the Constitution, but the dominant consensus coming out of the New Deal, coming out of the 60s, coming out of the Civil Rights era, was that the Constitution was an evolving document and that the scope of rights it either required or permitted was something that evolved with the developing political morality of the country. And if you recall, those of you who are old enough, when you studied constitutional law or analyzed constitutional problems, you were introduced to the penumbras of the Bill of Rights, and various ways were constructed to explain constitutional decisions that did not fit with the consciousness of the 18th century and 1789. For example, Roe v. Wade, granting the right of women in the first trimester to an abortion. Then later, Lawrence v. Texas, which wasn't true when I was in law school, but later that case which outlawed sodomy statutes on the grounds of right to privacy. Even Brown versus Board of Education was understood as expression of the evolution of consciousness over time, because to remind you, Brown versus Board of Education was the equal protection clause that it's based on originally justified the case of Plessy versus Ferguson, which stated in the 19th century that separate but equal met the requirement of equal protection under the 14th Amendment. Well, how did it change to 1954 to Brown versus Board of Education, indicating that separate but equal was inherently unequal? The only way it could have changed, and of course the way it did change, was through a powerful social movement that transformed the idea of equality. Thurgood Marshall, as the head lawyer for the NAACP, bringing lawsuit after lawsuit, and eventually a young Martin Luther King and the Black protest movement rising out of the Black churches to change people's consciousness about the meaning of equality. So the point is, we understood there was a changing conception of justice over time that was taken for granted when I was a law student. However, in the early 1980s, when Ronald Reagan was elected for the first time, he brought in a group of, I don't think it's harmful to say, they're just were senior white men, Ed Meese among them, if any of you recall that far back, who brought a new legal theory into the world with great intensity. And that is that the Constitution must be interpreted according to the original intent of the founding fathers. That was the discourse that Reagan brought with him. Now, it wasn't just Reagan. The Federalist Society was, if you know what that is, a very conservative society, is very, very successful in the United States, has been behind the appointments of all the current Supreme Court justices that believe in this. Their litmus test is, do you believe in originalism? That's the sort of basic requirement. As Sheldon Whitehouse, the senator from Rhode Island, pointed out when Amy Coney Barrett's hearings took place, is he pointed out the link between very large donors, the Heritage Institute and other very conservative sort of think tanks in Washington, the development of the Federalist Society, and the development, I'm adding, the development of original intent as a dominant philosophy. Now, the essence of where Reagan and Mies and those people were coming from in 1981 was they were in revolt against the spirit of the 1960s, against the social movements of the prior period. They were trying with all their might to not only engage in economic deregulation in contradiction to what labor had fought for in the 30s, but they also were out to, in a way, declare the 60s unconstitutional by saying these movements that were not consistent with the original intent of the founding fathers. And accompanying that was a kind of magicalization of the founding fathers. That is, these were mostly 20 and 30-year-old white male slaveholders in the 18th century. Why should we be determining who we are today based on what that group of people thought in 1789? The idea, to me, is preposterous. Is whether gay marriage is legitimate. We should consult with what Alexander Hamilton at 25 thought in 1789 is an absurd notion. But you have to understand the psychoanalytic dimension of what was taking place. Reagan was seeking to restore the vision of the city on the hill and the great authority, the great tradition of the kind of father knows best family that would be an answer to the social conflict of the social movements of the 1960s and restore not only authority, but also idealized images of the nation, the family, religion, or God. This was all part of the Reagan panoply of symbols. And the founding fathers were an important part of that. So these men that I could describe the way I just did as slaveholders who were in their 20s and 30s, mainly in the 18th century to over 200 years ago, were elevated into this unique stature as founding fathers. And I wrote an article at the time called "Founding Father Knows Best." That was an attempt to show the link between the Father Knows Best television show model of the family and the idealization of these men that lived a long time ago, and that we can give them credit for a great accomplishment in creating the Constitution without idolizing them or engaging in idolatry in relationship to them. So I tried to show the mass psychology of what Reagan and his supporters were trying to create. Well, today that has been in many ways successful, in some ways very unsuccessful. But it's been successful in that what was originally a hot moment in which original intent was brought to the fore by Ed Meese and others has now become a kind of standard bureaucratic philosophy called originalism, in which Scalia was basically the person that made this transition, in which he basically emphasized that originalism, he took all the energy out of the founding father psychoanalytic image, so to speak, and just turned it into its judicial activism to say that there exists any meaning of human right and and constitutionally valid social development, except what was part of the original public meaning of the document of the Constitution when it was drafted and the amendments when they were drafted. So you see, he sort of turned the founding fathers into something that is simply an analytical tool that you apply to cases like anything else. That's what originalism is. It's an analytical mode that judges now engage in to determine whether particular legislation is consistent with the original public meaning of a document of the Constitution in 1789. So the very idea that that everything that evolved over 200 some years that judges could find in the expansion of rights is judicial activism itself is based on a conception of what is not judicial activism. In other words, what is democratically decided by citizens, that is non-spiritual. And this is a key point, is that any attempt by judges to intuit, to find in the great uprisings of our history a basis of legal meaning that should shape the whole society, because that is not stated in written words in the Constitution, Scalia has been successful in convincing many people, or let's say, supporting the conservative voice that has said that doesn't really exist. We can't know that it exists. We can't know that this kind of grasping of the moral development of humanity is something that we can say is legally compelling upon our community, because we can't know that it's democratic, if you follow me. That's the essence of the argument that people like Amy Coney Barrett and others are making, following Scalia's lead. So I want you to see the steps here. First, it was original intent with the founding fathers. Then that became a bureaucratic philosophy that you could apply analytically. And then you have it being just a defense of democracy on the part of the conservatives. Democracy now being defined as what was written down in 1789 is the only thing we know that was agreed upon by the people at that time. Other interpretations of rights that involve an evolving document, because they do not validate the intuition of spiritual and moral development, because they do not validate that as a legitimate basis of law, they simply say it's judicial activism and therefore invalid. Now, beneath that, beneath everything I've said is a more fundamental contradiction between the model of the Constitution and the model of the great social movements that have sought to transform American society, and our own model as PISLAP of the world that we are trying to bring into existence. Because the Constitution itself is a document that is based on the idea that the world is a collection of individuals, all separated from each other, and the Constitution's job is to protect the individual against the state. So the First Amendment guarantees freedom of speech and freedom of religion for the individual. The Fourth Amendment protects your house against searches and seizures as an individual living in a house. The entire structure of the Constitution is based on a worldview of society as what I call here, and here's my PowerPoint, a collection of disconnected monads. Can you see that? That's the worldview of the Constitution. And it says DM in a few of those monads. Disconnected monads meaning we are a scattering of solitary persons, each pursuing our own private destiny with liberty to do so as we wish. That is the model of the Constitution. It's very different from our model, which I've also put in this little PowerPoint here, of us as a web of interconnected beings. Can you see that radiant energy coming out of the interconnected beings? Okay, that notion that we are a web of interconnected beings is excluded from the Constitution. It's a different picture of the world fundamentally from the constitutional picture. Now, why is this so important? because the social movements that have advanced the meaning of social justice over the last 250 years, let's say including the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the LGBTQ movement, all of these movements have brought into the world a much greater awareness of our interconnectedness, have brought into the world a spirit of mutuality, of love and care for one another through the rising force of the movement itself. That has altered social space and has advanced social consciousness. So that all the changes that you think of from the 1960s to today, of the transformation of the roles of women, of African Americans and other people of color, of LGBTQ people now being able to get married and live like human beings instead of being oppressed and brutalized and killed. All of these transformations have come from not as mere acts of power, but have come from a claim upon the whole society that originate from an awareness that these movements have brought into our social life. We have evolved and our minds have grown. But remember, the interpretation of the meaning of these movements now, when they enter the legal arena, had to be seen through this individualist lens of the Constitution. And do you follow that? In other words, these are social movements expressing evolving social consciousness. But then they enter the legal arena and they have to make argument for the expansion of constitutional rights. And when they do so, they enter into an arena of thought that says, well, we're all separated individuals. How can this contradiction or tension be reconciled? This is where all the liberal judges of our history have struggled. Ruth Bader Ginsburg being a classic example, but William Brennan, and any number of other liberal judges that we may look to over the past few hundred years, depending on what liberalism has meant. The attempt to expand the social into the individual framework has led to the expansion of rights, but in a way that has never been able to speak truthfully what it is that we really believe. Because the rights that we seek to expand are always brought back into the individualist universe. Let me take the example of affirmative action, which I talk about quite often. When affirmative action was rising up out of the Black churches, when the demand for civil rights and eventually the demand for affirmative action, emerging from the great upsurge of love of the Black churches that sought to say, we must love each other across our racial differences. We must create a world in which we see each other as fully human. When that was happening, affirmative action had a meaning that was redemptive for whites as well as Black. I remember it as a young man of feeling this is about correcting and the wrong of slavery through affirmative action that we take in order to repair the brutality and inhumanity and injustice of slavery. But when affirmative action got channeled into the constitutional framework, it became something very different. It lost that transcendent meaning of evolving, healing, social consciousness, and an emergence of love, care, and concern and mutual recognition in social consciousness. It lost that and became a struggle between individuals as to whether they would get contracts with the city or be admitted to law school or be admitted to medical school. And you know, the analysis, those of you who are lawyers, the analysis is if there was past discrimination, then you can use that past discrimination as a basis for increasing your likelihood of getting one of those jobs when competing against a white person for the job. So that analysis takes affirmative action, but returns it into an arena characterized by individuals engaging in individual competition rather than as a social healing that is designed to improve all of us and bring all of us into greater moral harmony by resolving some wound that has existed, distortion that has existed in our social fabric. So that's an example of how the consciousness of the movement, when it enters into the law, has to go into this notion of the world of disconnected people, disconnected monads, the world of individuals and the state, not the world of community that we aspire to and that we embody. There's nothing in our Constitution about an aspiration to community, to creating a loving world, a more caring world. That was not yet in the consciousness of the way people were thinking in 1789 when they drafted this document. The originalists have, what they have done is they have rejected these expansions of liberal rights by saying it's not written in the Constitution. And therefore, we insist that you go back to the literal wording of what was written in 1789 in determining the scope of these rights. So people like Scalia, see, they are arguing this is an individualist document. Democracy means is the same as individualism, established through voting and elections and established at the time the Constitution was ratified. Democracy is not linked to community. Community is not part of our historical document. Community is not part of the historical heritage that we are trying to affirm in the law, if you follow that. So people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg have had to defend their decisions as being exceptions to the individualist requirement of the Constitution. They're expansions of individual rights. Even when I was describing myself in law school, we had to find the justification for Roe versus Wade or Lawrence versus Texas later, or any of these liberal progressive decisions by finding penumbras of the Bill of Rights that could justify them. Well, that wasn't being able to really stand up for ourselves and say, no, we are for a fundamentally different view of the world in which human beings are connected to one another, in which the realization of love, care, and concern is a central part of what we're here on the planet for and what our country is about. We haven't been able to argue like that. Instead, we've had to say, well, we can find a penumbra of, well, let's say with the right of privacy, which was significant to Roe versus Wade and Lawrence versus Texas. We can find a little bit in the First Amendment. The Fourth Amendment protects unreasonable searches. The Ninth Amendment says all rights not granted to the states are reserved to the people. So the actual decisions had to stretch themselves into pretzels in order to find constitutional justifications for the right to abortion or the elimination of sodomy in the case of the LGBTQ movement, or to some extent even in Brown versus Board of Education in terms of the meaning of equal protection and equality. Okay, so we've been on the defensive. Liberals have been on the defensive against conservatives who say, well, these are just judicial activist fantasies, finding penumbras in the Bill of Rights that aren't there. What are you guys talking about? What's there is very clear. No unreasonable searches and seizures, freedom of speech. You see what I mean? So we have been a love that dare not speak its name. And in various ways, this has undermined all of the social movements of the 20th century and 21st century. By that, I mean, if I had time, which I don't have, I would try and show how this very contradiction had led the labor movement's goal of a shared workplace and workplace democracy to turn into just higher wages and safer working conditions, but keeping the system the way it is. The civil rights movement going from love across our racial differences and achieving a oneness to humanity embodied in the great voice of Martin Luther King, going to mere non-discrimination in housing or public accommodations or schooling. Non-discrimination means leave everybody as individuals, just don't discriminate on the basis of race. Well, that loses the entire transcendent meaning of the civil rights movement in granting the right itself to, that's really the reason that someone like Clarence Thomas can be perceived as an African-American conservative judge as an embodiment of the civil rights movement, even though he is the opposite of the transcendental, communitarian, loving dimension of the civil rights movement, because he represents not criminal basis of race and who is on the Supreme Court, if you follow what I'm saying. So the same is true of the women's movement. Those who are here who are women who want to overthrow patriarchy. You want to create a, I don't want to put it in your words of however you would put it, but you want to create a world in which male authority, hyper-rationality, and dominance that has been so characterized in society in so many ways is eliminated, is overcome, is transcended. But women's rights within the Constitution are narrowed down to assuring that women have equal rights to maybe to pay or to break the glass ceiling and become vice president or president. Of course, these are all very good things, but don't think I'm minimizing their importance. But the transcendent aspect of the movement is not reflected in the rights framework that is born out of built out of the Constitution. So to conclude, there's so much to say about this, really. What we need is ultimately to break past the paradigm that is constraining us. We need to, on the one hand, try to win all the liberal victories that we can, that many people on this call have fought for throughout their lives, the expansion of rights within the existing framework. But on the other hand, cede. So here's how I put that. Win rights under the existing regime of the individualist system and expand them in all the ways that we have tried to do as liberals, but evoke, when you win them, evoke a higher meaning of what the purpose is. So you don't just narrowly win a right analytically, you also evoke the better society that we are aspiring to, that the egalitarian and loving society that we are aspiring to. And then that's one part of our work. And then the other part of our work is what PISLAP is doing. Seed the future paradigm. The future paradigm will break free of 1789 and its narrow view of individuals and the state all disconnected from each other, and bring into being through restorative justice, transformative mediation, healing-centered interventions, bring into being a world that is based on our oneness as human beings, our capacity to recognize each other with love, care, and concern. And in the center of town, our legal system will be creating public spaces where truth, reconciliation, healing, and growth will be taking place. Well, of course, our current Supreme Court would declare all that as unconstitutional because it's not consistent with the original intent of the founding fathers. And, I mean, they actually would say it violates due process, all of the things that we are for, because that wasn't, it doesn't guarantee each individual an attorney to engage in an adversarial conflict with others. But of course, we have to hold that and say, we are building something new, a next stage of human consciousness that it took 400 years to get to 1789. So let's say we have to get to 2189 before we'll begin to have our own cultural revolution where we realize the next paradigm. It takes a long time to change people, but it's our connectedness that we need to affirm. And we need to see that this is a contradiction now, so long as we're battling within the framework, the limited framework established by the US Constitution as an individualist document. Okay.
Thank you, Peter. That was amazing. Folks, let me open it up, and the floor is open to share reflections on what Peter's raised and ask questions and just to have a conversation. Just give people a moment to think about it.
Libby has got her hand up.
Oh, Libby, yes, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Peter. This really helps my sanity. Let's see. One thing that just flashed into my mind is this framework you've laid out really puts legs under the notion that the U.S. is really an adolescent nation. And to think about the founders as being in their 20s and 30s, and we've been constrained by that kind of phase of human development, if nothing else, not even talking about the centuries of evolution of ethics, but just how you look at the world when you're in your 20s and 30s compared to the age that you and I are. So that's a really kind of interesting flash. And then I wasn't tuned into the originalist theorists saying that that the penumbra, those cases relying on the penumbra are not proven to be democratic. I guess they think that the judges are imposing their unique elitism on the rest of us somehow. So that brings to mind, would it be possible to very skillfully craft legislation that could be passed by Congress that could begin to shift the worldview in a way that wouldn't be stricken as unconstitutional by the originalists, but in a way that would celebrate democracy? I mean, this particular Congress, maybe not, but maybe in some states we could begin to experiment with really shifting those fundamentals somehow.
Well,
that's my question.
You know, so when the labor movement was emerging with the power of the unions in the 1930s, and you remember Roosevelt's court packing scheme, as it was called. Well, you know, Roosevelt was facing this with the courts in the Lochner era finding legislation in support of unions to be unconstitutional because it interfered with the equivalent at that time of original intent. It was the freedom of contract interpretation of the liberty clause of the clauses of the Constitution. And so Roosevelt said, well, I'm just going to expand the court then, because Roosevelt knew that there was that in the New Deal, what he was trying to redeem and recover and save in American society, and with the power of the labor movement behind him, he knew he had a tremendous public force to change judicial consciousness. And so although the court packing scheme didn't happen, it was a factor in eventually transforming the way the Supreme Court treated labor legislation, Social Security, all the legislation that now is regarded as constitutional. Although I wouldn't put it past this group that we have now to take some of that on as well. But eventually those did become understood as constitutional pieces of legislation. Today, Joe Biden is, as you may know, assembling a group right now to discuss expansion of the Supreme Court and transformation of the judiciary. How can he do that? It's going to be hugely conflictual whenever he comes forward with a recommendation. It's going to be a public outcry. Nevertheless, there is a tremendous social force, positive social force right now in the world that Biden knows is behind him. Against it are these conservatives and these original intent people on the Supreme Court, but he knows that there's going to be progressive legislation for healthcare, the environment, and other areas or public funding of elections even, that the Supreme Court is going to try to strike down under its originalist mentality. And he's going to challenge that with this new commission in the same way that Roosevelt did in the 1930s. So it's an interesting moment. Now, really what you're saying, Libby, that's very important is it's not enough. It's not enough because we have to go beyond the liberal framework altogether. And you're saying, could we have state groupings that seek to do that? I think that would be great. But first you have to understand this stuff that I've been saying today in the call, that it's not the Constitution, it's the next paradigm that we're trying to give birth to. Stu, yes.
Oh, I think Bonnie had her hand up.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, I
Nana,
wonder
you call on people, please.
I wonder if it'd be possible to, my phone's on just a second.
Bonnie, why don't you ask what or say what you were going to say?
I just wanted to say that I was so excited about this because there's so many. I'm currently teaching women in the law, and I have almost all women in the class, and they're so excited to get to become lawyers and make changes. And I don't want to take away any of their enthusiasm, but I know they're probably going to come up against the kinds of things that I experienced going to law school. And the originalism is such an interesting thought experiment, but is absolutely dreadful when it's put into practice. And so, there's that enjoyment of learning about it, but not necessarily once you actually see how it's applied. And after I became a mother and thought we needed maternity benefits, and then I went to the UK where you have an entire year, for those of you from the UK, on the call, and I saw that there were still so many limitations with that, and there was still quite a lot. So you were sort of given like this little thing that you get 1 year off, but not all of the underpinnings that are required. So to make deep structural changes. And I fear that when we get one we get our first female vice president and everyone's excited. And then what's the impact of everyone saying, I'm going to be that vice president instead of thinking about the broader issues. So everything you said just really spoke to me.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you.
Stu?
I was wondering that.
Thank you, Bonnie.
It'd be interesting to think about the possibility of turning the originalism on its head, because one of the things that is true of our original people is that they all believed in something higher than themselves. You can see they say, in God we trust, but God is not necessarily the concept that they had in mind for God. It could be higher energy, could be anything. So they did have a concept of something beyond themselves, and democracy itself implies that there's something greater than ourselves, something greater than individuals. So I think there's some ways that origination can be said it's not just about separate people, it's about something higher than ourselves, and that the Constitution itself is progressive in that sense. Instead of having to fight through all the finding little niches like we've had to do of assuming that the original people were separate, we can argue that the original people were not. They were part of something greater than themselves.
The thing is, Stu, that these same people, the originalists on the Supreme Court, are all Catholics. They all purport to believe just what you said. So the problem is that someone brought up the doctrine of discovery and how religion justified the oppression of the native peoples who were here when we came. Religion has been behind this. The combination of authoritarian religion on the one hand and individualism on the other is our problem. So these guys from Scalia, all of them they're believers in something higher, but tragically it justifies something lower.
But the translation could be that translates something to religion. There's something higher than religion.
Well, wouldn't you say, I know you think what I'm about to say, so I know you think what I'm about to say, which is that we are an evolving consciousness. We human beings are evolving the consciousness of the world to higher and higher levels. That's what Martin Luther King meant by the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. We are bending it, each generation as we rise up. So we can respect the people of 1789. They defended the liberty of the individual against persecutory religion, against the monarchies of Europe, against all kinds of injustices. So, you know, we can give them a gold star for that one aspect of what they did and not be hung up about them, because we're part of the evolution of consciousness to something higher. Thank G-D.
Yudong?
Hi, I just have actually two questions, but I guess I'll ask the first one, which is the more important one. That is, when politicians, right, when they observe that these social movements revolving around legal reform, when they do arise, politicians and media like to frame them in a way that alienate this movement as a separate event that doesn't really have much relevance to the rest of the society, rest of our culture. And that in itself takes away the cohesive force within the social movement, which can make sustainable, permanent changes happen. So I'm just wondering, is there any way or any, I guess, competing narrative that can, you know, actually convince people, you know, for example, incoming law students with an idealistic aspect of their career ambition, how do we convince them that it's not just about being a good lawyer or a bad lawyer, but actually you can be a part of this great change in which law is only a critical, but only a part of the whole process? Thank you.
Anybody else who wants to speak to that? I mean, here, the thing about law school, the point you make is, of course, law students come with a sort of intuition about justice and a good world when they first walk in the door. But by the time they throw you into cases in the first few weeks of class and you get to November, you're lost. It's like you go into the funny house in the amusement park where all the mirrors are, and you can no longer see yourself reflected in your higher consciousness, because you've had to look into a mirror that is very complicated and difficult to decipher and has nothing to do with what the idealism was that you brought in the first place. Not at every law school, but at many law schools, that's what happened. I'd make an exception for CUNY, for example, the City University of New York Law School. So I don't know if I'm speaking to that. I'm totally with you. It definitely can happen, but it requires this kind of radical vision being brought in and challenging the dominant ethos of contracts, torts, property, civil procedure. All these are individualist courses that need another. I even wrote a list down for what you could do. Torts should be about caring about each other, not about protecting your isolated space. Property should be about the sacredness of the earth and the sharing the land for the benefit of the community, not borders where you have your own little parcel as the primary basis of property and you can exclude other people. Corporations should be joint ventures with a social purpose, where that purpose becomes the basis of people's investment of whatever kind, rather than the maximization of short-term profits to isolated and scattered shareholders. Do you see what I mean, Yudong? It's a different paradigm that you bring right into the law and say, okay, we have a completely different view of what these subjects should be about.
Sorry to interrupt. Where can we find what you just said, the new definitions of these concepts? Which book is it in?
It must be somewhere.
Okay.
I've written these things down. I write them down all the time, but there must be somebody else who's tried to. There is more out there. Sure.
Okay.
And you found there's a lot being written. Motir.
Yeah. Just to respond to that, and to maybe what was Stu was saying, was like, how do you like, what are the tactics that you can use to try to struggle against this? And one way, maybe the other way, is also to look back to the original, like to John Locke's ideas. At the time when those ideas were imported from England, there was actually a different. It wasn't just the state and private property, there was another competing idea of the commons, which was disappearing. And so there is, in that original tent, the commons, which is actually no longer there. The other thing I was really interested in, well, in terms of original, going back to the original, I discovered a 1988 Congress resolution, which talks about the Iroquois, which were the Six Nations. And there's a 1988 Congress resolution, which talked about the influence of the Six Nations on that. And I was wondering, to what extent, like, it doesn't actually say, I've looked at the resolution there, like to what extent that because they had their own constitution at that time, which was a matrilineal line. And to what extent they talk about, Benjamin Franklin and Washington, and they had these conversations, but it doesn't actually say to what extent there was some sort of but using that sort of intent, going back to what was the intent, what were the discussions? Could that be something that could unearth something?
Again, why not, on the one hand, if it's helpful? Personally, I'm just not into going back to these white, bewigged, larger-than-life figures of the past, because that very process of thinking you find the answer in Washington and so forth, that is, to me, I'm looking to Motyer, Raman, and what your ideas are going to be about the commons for my inspiration about what we should be doing, rather than the founding fathers as such, no matter what they actually did. Because when you try and get into the conversation based on what may have influenced them, you're dancing with the devil. It's a terrible way to put it, but you're going to be drawn into a narrowing framework of the past. Whereas we have quite a lot of confidence that the things that I have been speaking to, the creation of a loving and caring world based on our mutuality, whatever Martin Luther King said, a single garment of destiny. I mean, to me, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, just because what I wasn't going back to those words, is what has been invisibilized. So, like these movements, Black Lives Matter, COVID, it's all demonstrating that there is unconscious bias, there's structural privilege in the stories that go ahead, and there are stories that are invisible.
I see.
Same in religion, that happens is that, you forget the original intent, the thing that's at the source of it. And at the source that, these Six Nations, and I actually had a conversation with somebody who is carrying still the faith leader of these nations, of the Iroquois, who carries that flame. He said there's something lost in those discussions, hasn't even been understood properly. And that sort of like bringing forth what is in these marginalized voices could be part of like making these stories equal.
Yes.
To those, rather than giving a special privilege just to the whites, that story.
I see. Hear, hear. So why not? I mean, that's a good way to make use of the great voices of the past that have prefigured the world and pre-intuited the world we want to bring into being. So
kind of both and.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Anyone else want to speak? Yeah, Bruce, go ahead.
Well, Peter, I'm inspired by what you say. I keep thinking about what our political philosophy is. We have a moral, spiritual philosophy. We're in a social contract, if you will, with 74 million people who voted for Donald Trump, and we could form a group that would act in solidarity with what you say, but it ain't just us. So the one thing, the power of the originalist interpretation isn't just that it's conservative, it's that it's precise. And you can tell somebody they're wrong. Scalia could say, you're wrong. And I was a judge for 20 years. I was always delighted to do what I thought was right and my evolved spiritual consciousness about how people relate to each other. But unless somebody could tell me you're wrong, I always felt like it was I felt like it was judicial activism, I guess. So what is our alternative political philosophy beyond the social contract that we currently have with these 74 million people, which is embodied in a written constitution, how do we get along with them?
Well, we could all answer that. I mean, for me, we are a rising force, intergenerational force for good. And there's understandable reaction that is anxious about that. And that anxiety and fear is manifested in, it can be manifested in the millions, tens of millions of people who are resisting something. Just as whites resisted the civil rights movement in the the 1890s, 1900s, all the way up through 1970s and 80s, and are still doing so. So there's reaction, there's movement forward, and there's reaction out of fear. Personally, speaking for myself, I identify with the movement forward. So I see myself as part of a different we the people, a we the people that is trying to create a better world. And I understand with, I think, genuine compassion, people who are fearful about that, don't yet identify with it, feel they're going to lose their prior forms of identity and worth, and cling on to that. I do understand them. I think we have to address them. We have to figure out processes where we can hear what it is that they are experiencing. I would say help them overcome the humiliation of their isolation within our alienated world by building more communal forms of that world, more caring, more loving, more just forms of that world that they then can be drawn to safely. So I'm not really answering you, Bruce. I'm just saying.
No, you're not.
No, but if you're looking for, I don't want a political philosophy that's based on who will sign this document. And then that's
you're laying out a very, I happen to agree with your political tactics, but it sounds just like sort of power politics. You know, we're gonna work this out, and we're gonna convince them that we're right. It doesn't exactly. It doesn't sound. It sounds like democracy maybe, but it doesn't sound like a constitution, which is sort of a framework above a democracy that we all agree upon.
Oh, well, I'm glad to. We're not going to be able to create that constitution yet. We couldn't get everybody together to agree to it in a large enough number. So we're only giving birth to a constitution that we're going to write in 100 years, Bruce.
So what we're seeing
a constitution where it says we are based on creating a more loving world, where everyone has housing and food and healthcare, where everyone, where communities take care of each other, and that's the second article of our Constitution. That
Peter,
will be written, but it will be written in the future. We're only giving birth to the consciousness now that will ultimately be embodied in some political form in the future. That's the way I would put. That's
Peter,
my answer to you. Whether it's good or not, that's it.
Bernie's already written it.
Who has?
Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, Bernie has written some of it. He has written some of it, and he behaves that way.
Peter, you are speaking to the duality that we have between love and fear. And that's one of the struggles we always have, trying to stay on the right-hand side of that duality. But there is something beyond the duality. And that is the mutuality. That is the mutuality that you speak of in your book. And that is beyond the duality. And that's one of the things we're speaking to, is that there is something beyond that. There's a higher consciousness that is beyond the duality we've been stuck in. And that's part of what spirituality is about. There's something beyond the duality. And that is part of the seed that hopefully we're planting.
Beautiful.
Let me call on, thank you, Stu, Kim Vanderheiden for our last reflection of the day.
Thank you, Nanette. I just wanted to respond to what Bruce is saying, and it plays into what I put in the chat also, because I've been very concerned about some of this. I can see that the foundation, as Peter has been describing, the foundation doesn't actually work anymore as we switch to a different consciousness, as we switch to law based on love and justice, as love is the foundation of justice. That is not what our system is built on. But one of the things I see is the importance of infrastructure. And that when we do small things to build the infrastructure of restorative justice, of truth and reconciliation, of all of the different, strengthening all of the different interrelated ways that we connect and approach conflict, that's part of building what's needed. And I'm very reassured by what Peter's saying about, this is really a long view. This is a long project. And we may never see the fruits of it. It might be beyond our lifetimes. But we're working on it now. The other thing, which I didn't say in my comment, but should be the most obvious thing for me as an artist, is that we need to build the culture that supports it. The cultural references, that is part of the shift in consciousness. And it's also part of strengthening people as they continue to build the infrastructure and take us to a point where the change can actually be made.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. So everyone, I think we probably need to break now, but thank you so much to Peter. I think we all could have talked quite a bit longer, and there's a lot to think about in terms of how to really engage with these issues, how to build this movement, and how to engage with the doctrine that's there, and how social movements can keep flourishing. And yet we who are in the legal system are, in a position to engage with these and try to create new forms of law, new whether it's conscious contracting or other cooperative forms of law that can build a parallel reality that reflects these social movements. And Bruce and others have raised important questions and concerns that we're going to have to continue to engage with and be able to respond to. So thanks everyone so much for being here, and thank you so much to Peter. And please continue to join us for PISLAP calls. And
when's the next one, do we know?
Yes, the next one is March, I believe it's March 10th, but I'm double checking my calendar right now. And it's with Barry Lee, who is from the UK, same time. And we'll get a description out, and we'll get a recording of Peter's talk.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you all. Love you.
Thank
Love you guys.